Every year, the average person consumes around 77 pounds of sugar. Not because they chose to. Because it was engineered that way. The industry that makes this possible has been running the same playbook for 400 years, and the version of it that happened in the 1960s shaped every nutritional guideline you grew up with. Nadia is a food scientist who spent 8 years working in product development for a major consumer goods company. She spent most of those years optimizing what the industry calls the bliss point, the precise sugar concentration that makes a product impossible to stop eating. She said the science wasn't the hard part. The hard part was learning it had all been done before deliberately, a long time ago. This is the actual history of sugar, not the version from a history class, but the version that explains why the world looks exactly the way it does right now. Sugar is native to New Guinea, where it was cultivated as far back as 8000 BCE. For most of its history, it moved slowly westward, into India, Persia, then into the Arab world, where chemists in the 9th century developed the first techniques for refining it into a dry, granulated form. When crusaders returned from the Middle East in the 11th and 12th centuries, they brought sugar back to Europe as a trophy. In England, in the 13th century, sugar cost the equivalent of roughly 50 pounds per kilogram in today's money. It was used in tiny quantities, by royalty, as a spice, and as a medicine. Physicians prescribed sugar for everything from coughs to digestive problems to melancholy. The only people who could afford it had it carved into sculptures at their banquets, a show of wealth that was, almost literally, edible architecture. That exclusivity ended the moment Europe discovered it could grow sugar in the Americas. The first sugar plantation in the New World was established by Christopher Columbus himself on Hispaniola in 1493, on his second voyage. Within 50 years, the Caribbean had been transformed into a sugar production machine. The problem was labor. Growing and harvesting sugarcane is extraordinarily brutal physical work. The cane must be cut by hand, in tropical heat, immediately after harvest, because it ferments within hours. The mills ran continuously during harvest season, which meant workers ran continuously, shifts of up to 18 hours, surrounded by open machinery, boiling vats, and no safety systems of any kind. Indigenous populations in the Caribbean were decimated by European disease within decades of contact. So the plantation economy turned to the transatlantic slave trade. Historians estimate that between 60 and 70% of all enslaved Africans transported to the Americas were sent to sugar colonies. Not tobacco. Not cotton. Sugar. Between 1500 and 1900, roughly 12.5 million people were forcibly transported across the Atlantic. The majority of them were sent to produce a product that Europeans wanted in their tea. By the 17th century, sugar had stopped being a luxury and had become a political obsession. Britain and France went to war repeatedly over Caribbean islands that produced it. When Britain took Guadeloupe from France during the 7 Years' War, the peace negotiations that followed included a genuinely serious debate about whether Britain should return Canada to France and keep Guadeloupe instead. A sugar island was considered comparable in value to an entire subcontinent. The abolition of the slave trade in Britain in 1807 did not end sugar production. It changed the sourcing model. Indentured labor from India and China replaced enslaved labor in many colonies, under contracts so coercive that historians treat them as slavery in practical effect. The empire of sugar simply restructured itself. Now jump forward to 1965. The sugar industry in America was facing a genuine scientific threat. Researchers, most notably John Yudkin, a British physiologist, were publishing evidence linking sugar consumption to heart disease. Yudkin's 1972 book Pure, White, and Deadly made the case directly, and the evidence was credible enough to alarm the industry. What happened next was not unique in the history of corporate science manipulation, but it was among the most consequential. A group called the Sugar Research Foundation, funded by the largest sugar companies in the United States, paid 3 Harvard scientists to publish a literature review in the New England Journal of Medicine. The review was designed to shift attention away from sugar and toward dietary fat as the primary driver of heart disease. The scientists were paid the equivalent of roughly $50,000 in today's money. The review was published in 1967. One of the authors, Mark Hegsted, later went on to help draft the first United States dietary guidelines in 1977. Those guidelines told Americans to eat less fat. The sugar content of the American diet was not addressed. For the next 50 years, the food industry reformulated products to be low fat and replaced the fat with sugar because fat is what makes food taste like something, and sugar is the cheapest way to compensate. low-fat yogurt, low-fat salad dressing, low-fat breakfast cereal. All of them significantly higher in sugar than their full-fat predecessors. The internal documents proving this arrangement were uncovered by researchers at the University of California, San Francisco in 2016 and published in JAMA Internal Medicine. The Sugar Research Foundation had known since 1968, from its own funded studies, that high sugar diets in rats produced elevated triglycerides and bladder cancer markers. It buried those findings and ended the research program. Nadia, who left the industry 3 years ago, said the thing that stays with her isn't the history. It's the fact that the optimization tools she used are more precise now than they have ever been. The bliss point is no longer a guess. It is calculated. The 77 pounds per year figure isn't the result of personal weakness or lack of discipline. It is the output of 4 centuries of deliberate engineering, from the plantation to the laboratory, designed to make stopping feel impossible. Knowing the history doesn't make the sugar disappear from the shelves, but it changes what you're actually looking at when you reach for it. If you want to understand how the same corporate science playbook was used by the tobacco industry, the pharmaceutical industry, and the fossil fuel sector, and how to identify it when it's running in real time, that's the next video. The pattern is identical. The names just change.